Let's take a look at how we can use Animbot's temp controllers in this scenario where I've blocked out this character's jump using the root controller. And the reason I've done that is because it can be a lot quicker moving your character around like this. Because if I move the character's root controller, it's going to move all of the controllers that come with that character. Instead of, say, for instance, selecting the COG controller, the two IK legs. Sometimes you'll have to select the pole vectors as well. If you have IK arms, you'll have to select those to move the character in space. And even when you've done that, it doesn't really work in terms of rotation. So with the root controller, right, I can again select and move all of those as one. And if I use that in conjunction with something like the Temp pivot in Animbot, I can change the pivot point as well to wherever I want that to be. So it's going to create a much more intuitive way of moving the character in space. But typically you don't want to have, as a finished animation, you don't want to have animation on the root controller, because a lot of times it's going to create issues with sliding or counter animating with the COG controller and make the process just a lot more difficult than it needs to be because of those counter animations. And as well, it's nice to have a clean controller so that if you want to offset your character in space, say you add a set or another character and you need to change the spatial relationship of your primary character like this, it gives you that flexibility to be able to do that. So let's take a look at how we can transfer the animation back onto the other controllers. So what I'm going to do is select the controllers on the character that are going to move the whole character around. So for this, it's going to be the COG and the legs, but also if we look at the hands, I've set the arms to world space there, so I want to select them as well. Okay, and then I'll go to Temp Pivot. No, not Temp Pivot. I'll go to Temp Controls. I'll just use the simple controller set to world space. With all of those selected, actually, yeah, okay. With all of those selected, it's going to create a temp controller for each of the controllers that I had selected. So let's go into the temp controllers panel and we can see those now. So essentially what it's done is it's created this controller that is now controlling our COG controller. Same thing with the feet, and they're all set to world space. So we have the world space values, transform values of all of those, and we can bake those into the controllers so that we don't need the root controller anymore for that. So what I'm going to do is select that root controller, double click on the timeline to select all of the keys on the timeline, right click, and then go to cut. And now there's no animation on that, but it's still, in terms of the animation, it's still moving the character forward. Now you'll notice a bit of an animation as well on this offset controller here. So I'm just going to do the same thing, double click, right click, and cut. So the animation looks exactly as it did before, but we have no animation now on the root controller or the offset root controller. So now at this point, I can select all of the temp controllers and I can clear and bake. And I'm going to be clearing and baking on keys rather than frames for this because I'm really just in the blocking stage. So clear and bake. And now it clears out those temp controllers and it bakes the positions into the original rig controllers. So a pretty handy tool for transferring that kind of animation information.